Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again on my YouTube channel. This is Workshop Quick Takes. Last time on our episode of Basic Auto, we looked at what it took to get the headliner upholstery changed out on a 2000 Jeep Cherokee XJ. Well, there's a couple other tasks that you might want to do while you're up there because you've got to remove the same amount of trim and material to get at them. One is the rear soundbar speakers. Those are definitely something that you have to pull the headliner to get at. The other, which you don't have to pull the headliner to get at, but you're going to be using the exact same upholstery fabric probably, is the sun visors. Sun visors, as long as the spring mechanism that folds them up and down is still good, don't have to be trashed or located at a junkyard if all that's wrong is that the upholstery is messed up. You can replace that and it's easier than it looks. So, on today's episode, let's take a look at that. And if you missed what it takes to reupholster the headliner and are curious about that, look at the previous episode. Let's dive into it. Okay, let's take a quick look at what's going to be involved in recovering these sun visors. The first challenge we have is notice the electrical connector. These do in fact have lights. But from working out the first one, it appears that in order to get these loose, what's the best way? Do we do it from the front or do it from the back? There we go. The next step is these wires, which we will need to reconnect later. These are actually just pushed through. And they have these one-way tabs that don't really come out easily, so what I'm just going to do is trim the top as close as I can. Black plus whatever was on this side, and green, stripey, whatever was on this side. And then pull the remnant of the wire all the way through. Done. That's going to need some cleaning, but I'll set it aside for now. Okay, the next step is how to free this upholstery foam. Interestingly, this one, it is not glued on. What they did do, however, is made a folding plastic clamshell out of this piece. And as a result, this here is actually just pinched in between the two halves. And that there, getting pretty floppy, it's just about to break, so I might have to reinforce that. Thankfully that's not too destroyed, which means I can use it as a pattern for cutting the new piece. At this point, we trace the old fabric onto an extra section of the same foam-backed upholstery we used to recover the headliner. We intentionally over-ordered the length of fabric by a meter or so to ensure we had enough matching material for both sun visors. When tracing the outline, try to err on the side of too much fabric. As with all similar endeavors, it's easy to trim and remove the excess later. It's somewhat more difficult to add it back after cutting off too much. In an OE assembly of this vintage, each visor is comprised of a clamshell that snaps together using one-time assembly hooks. Each half contains spikes that intrude into the clamshell from both sides and will neatly snag upholstery fabric and errant fingers that intrude inside the edge of the clamshell. Now, if it isn't clear what we're doing here, let's pop open one of the visor clamshell assemblies. This will require a heat gun and patience. However, unless you're having trouble with the internal spring, you do not need to perform this step in order to repair the upholstery. We only figured that out after completely disassembling one for practice, so we're going to show it to you for the sake of a visual aid. Now that we've got that figured out, to replace the upholstery, it is only necessary to force the custom cut upholstery fabric piece into the clamshell using a putty knife or a similar flat, rigid, and relatively dull tool edge. The spikes will then snag and trap the upholstery inside the clamshell assembly, looking exactly like a neatly sewn seam. You then only need to tug the remaining edges in and around the other protrusions for the hinge, catch, and in this case, the lighted mirror assembly. Well, we've got these mirror assemblies taken apart. Let's just take a quick look at how these things work, because it's kind of ingenious how simple and cheap all this is to put together, considering all that it does. The mirror glass is normally facing this direction, and we have these little 3AG style fuse lights on either end here. The slider on this light overlaps that right there. Sort of snaps in there, like so, and moves that plate up and down. And again, there's nothing special about that plate. It's just kind of snapped into the plastic there. Flipping it over, we have our two wire entrances here and here. This one actually comes and there's a piece of just this brass tab bent up. And when the mirror lid opens, it pushes this down and those make contact. So that's how it comes on or off with the lid flipping up. That then energizes this piece here, which then has these ears coming down onto the slider. Now notice, in the all the way up position, these ears touch metal on the back side of that plate, which then touch these ears, which then feed the lighting circuit. One of the lights taps off of here, and the other one taps off of here. And then the return for both lights is right here over to there. You run the slider, however, now there's a piece of resistive material just laminated on there with insulating tape underneath. And the farther you go down, the more resistive material there is in the circuit, which dims the lights. And notice how all of this is just put onto this piece of plastic. It comes with these little nips just standing up there. And when this is installed, then those little nips are just given a little quick heat treatment, melting them down, and now everything's on there tight. Except for that right there. I'm not sure why they didn't do two more there, but it works because once installed in the mirror assembly, all that's just held down flat. Nothing's going to go anywhere. Wild little circuit for what it does, but it works. I mean, it's 20 years old and it was still functioning fine in both sides. When we bought this Jeep, one of the first things we noticed was that exactly one speaker, out of the 4 locations originally provided by Chrysler, was actually talking to us from the aftermarket head unit someone had previously swapped, which we then swapped later for our Bluetooth capable unit. Once the decision was made to pull and refurbish the headliner, we went ahead and ordered a pair of replacement speakers for the rear soundbar. If you have any intention of ever replacing those units, this is when you want to do it on a 97-01 Cherokee. Chrysler moved them from the liftgate to the ceiling in the 1997 redesign, and the only way to get at the rear soundbar is to remove the headliner. So, if you're already committed to the headliner project, just yank the band-aid off and do the rear audio work at the same time. Unfortunately, since car speaker designs are not standardized much beyond the nominal screw hole diameters, we can't really give you a tutorial on how to mount your particular units. You will of course need a drill and possibly a jigsaw and a utility knife to trim things up, but otherwise each job is somewhat custom. Here at Ches Vino, we've done probably a dozen odd head unit swaps, maybe twice that many car and SUV speakers, plus a smattering of amps and subwoofers, and every single one was a semi-custom job. It's just the nature of the beast. What many speaker swaps do have in common is the availability of adapters that plug into the factory speaker harness and then give you the bare lead ends, which you can either solder to the speaker or crimp to appropriately sized bay terminals on the workbench. If you're certain that a previous owner hasn't already chopped up your OE wiring, you could order a pair of the plug adapters and make your job slightly easier. One more thing you can do, which we did, is to add polyester damping fill to your speakers. Polyfill can be purchased from speaker suppliers with the usual markup, but the exact same product can also be purchased from fabric stores as batting for stuffing pillows and rebuilding chair cushions. However you obtain it, Polyfill can slightly enhance the bass response of your soundbar speakers and reduce the transfer of noise and vibrations through the audio system. You can decide how to best cut, fill, and secure your installation, but for our use, we applied a bit of 3M Super 77 contact adhesive and screwed a couple strips of plastic gas line strap from the local home improvement store across the backing to ensure that it won't wander away. Just make sure your vehicle's roof isn't leaking, because if the Polyfill soaks with water, it will help rot away your soundbar speakers in just a few years. For that same reason, we don't recommend applying it to your front door speakers unless additional custom moisture proofing is applied to the installation. Everyone, thanks for joining me again today. Hopefully you found that informational, useful, and maybe even helpful. Maybe there's something you can go do in your vehicle to clean it up, change the appearance, improve it, whatever. So if you've got sun visors, a sound bar with speakers, or even headliner upholstery, that was last episode, go check it out if you haven't yet. That's something that you can do at home using relatively affordable materials, and as long as you know what you're doing, it's relatively safe. There's nothing complicated about this. Just don't cut yourself up with a knife. Thanks for joining me. See you again next time, whenever that is. Has anyone seen my phone?